I'd like to welcome you today to our Rotary Club of Melbourne and the proceedings for the day. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which the Rotary Club of Melbourne meets. We acknowledge the Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin language groups, on whose unceded country we do conduct the business of the club. We pledge to work together with their peoples. We acknowledge their culture and their elders past, present, and emerging. All right. I think I'll pass over to Peter to give the thanks.
Thanks for the boost, Carol. Here are some interesting facts to be found in 100 moments in 100 years. The page opened in front of me over the breakfast table. 3 days before the outbreak of World War II, Sir Angus Mitchell wrote to his friend Paul Harris in these words: "Friendliness and understanding and goodwill were the only lines upon which nations could settle their differences." Throughout the war, Mitchell planned for reconciliation with Rotarians in Germany and Japan. As president of Rotary International, he traveled 160,000 kilometers visiting Rotary clubs in Americas, Africa, Europe, and Oceania. His warmth, simplicity, and sincerity, based upon his Presbyterian faith, made a deep impression on all who met him. By the end of his presidency, 5 clubs in Japan and 2 in Germany were readmitted to Rotary International. He was wise, tolerant, and dispassionate in considering the problems confronting the world, and there were many over all his long terms of office. Today's Peace Institutes identify 8 pillars of peace. And if you wish to find them, just Google Pillars for Peace. I'm not going to read the whole 8 of them out, which he would have agreed with. For Sir Angus Mitchell, for fellowship, good food, in a dangerous world, we give thanks. Amen.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Carol. Again, we're improvising a little today, but it does get this camera out, this microphone out of the way. It's my great pleasure to welcome you today to this iconic meeting. The Angus Mitchell is a highlight of our year every year. And I'd like now to propose the toast, Rotarians and guests. A toast to Australia and Rotary International. Australia, Rotary International. Thank you. Please be seated. For those online, you'll be invited to join a breakout room where you can enjoy fellowship with others who are online, or alternatively, you can take a break for lunch. We'll reconvene at around 1:10 p.m. Thank you, everyone.
Our 4,925th club meeting in our 101st year. I have to say, it is truly wonderful to see you all here today, and the vibe in the room says it all for me. But also welcome to, as I said, this signature event of Rotary Melbourne, our 52nd Angus Mitchell Oration, one of our most important events each Rotary year. We're honoured today to have with us esteemed medical researcher, Professor Jim Angus, AO, Lieutenant Governor of Victoria. Jim will deliver our 52nd Angus Mitchell Oration. Today, his topic, Medicinal Use of Cannabis in Australia, Evidence or Promise. Jim will be further introduced shortly by past President Peter Dakin. In the meantime, would you please acknowledge his presence and make him welcome. Also here today, I welcome our guests, immediate past, intending to be here, but seems unable to have made it, immediate past District Governor Philip Archer, and Assistant Governor and Batman Cluster of the Batman Cluster, our very own Murray Anderson. When I say very own, he's been a regular visitor here. Thank you, everyone. We have some visiting Rotarians and guests, and I'll name each of those, and you can hold off the applause until we can ask them all to stand and be acknowledged collectively. Firstly, we have a second visit of an international visiting Rotarian, Ash Nair, President of Dargaville Rotary, New Zealand. And I understand, Ash, that you're going through a lockout from New Zealand as we speak. So we're happy to treat you as an honorary member in the meantime. Now, several guests, and many of them will be known to us all. Firstly, John Allen, who is the guest of Robert Fisher, Margaret Ross, who's the guest of Ian Ross, John and Alice Turnbull, and Kathy Rogers, the guests of Peter Rogers, Richard Ebbs, the guest of Board Member Nick Fallon, and Jock Holland, guest of David Dunn. You can all stand with your host and we'll collectively acknowledge. Thank you, everyone. I only have a couple of very brief announcements today. Firstly, the club's the two major public awards in the next few months. Firstly, we've got the Young Achiever Award, as well as the Environment Sustainability Award. A reminder that both of the two committees involved are currently seeking nominations. We really need club members to think about people they've seen providing service in the community, young achievers and so on. Both selection committees are happy to do all the research or just more names of candidates. So please draw those to the relevant committee's attention. And now, without further ado, I'm going to draw the raffle. I won't invite anyone to get up, but I will draw the raffle myself. And I'm pleased to announce that it's an orange ticket. That probably rules about half of us out of the raffle, just for that announcement. And the ticket number is C for Cat 57. David Mandy, thank you. I missed that a lot. I think our guest Ash was one of which I think is very fitting.
I want to take all the money from Australia.
Okay, it's now my enormous pleasure to give you some background on Sir Angus Mitchell. He was a past president of this club, and both the first member and first Australian to become worldwide president of Rotary. Angus Mitchell was born in Shanghai, China, moved to Australia with his family at a young age and settled in Williamstown. He became a wheat trader, was president of the club in 1931-32, and enjoyed it so much he retired early at the age of 51 and devoted the rest of his career to Rotary. He was elected district governor twice and was a great leader of Rotary during the Reconstruction which followed World War II. He was nominated as Rotary International President in 1948, and in his acceptance speech, he said, "I hope that Rotary never departs from the simple but vital principle of friendly service. When we become friendly with members of our club, we cannot help pulling our weight in the club. It follows, likewise, if we are friendly with our associated business, associate those with whom we're associated in business, we deal fairly with them. If we are friendly with our fellow citizens, we become involved in the community. And if we make friends with people from other countries, we will contribute to international understanding and peace. Angus Mitchell dreamed large. It was his efforts for people with disabilities that saw Rotary Melbourne work with Rotary International and the World Health Organization in the 1960s to vaccinate against polio, with one of the most impressive and imaginative preventive programs, and to vaccinate, to end up aiming to vaccinate all children of the world by the year 2005. Regrettably, still a little work to be done, but it's nearly done. And the Angus Mitchell Oration, and I might just say one other of his passions was service to youth. And it is absolutely joyous for me to say that that remains a major legacy of the work that this club does through our Welfare of the Young Committee. The Angus Mitchell Oration was initiated by our board of directors in 1971 in honour of Sir Angus Mitchell as part of the club's 50th birthday celebrations. The oration is set near the birthday of Rotary, which began in February 1905. In fact, I'm pretty sure it was around about today. And in Chicago, founded by Paul Harris, who in later life became a close personal friend of Angus Mitchell. The oration has been delivered by many eminent Australians, and it's great to have another eminent Australian here today. I now call on Chair of the Day, past President Peter Dakin, to introduce Angus Mitchell Orator.
Good afternoon, Rotarians and guests present here today, and also at home or the office on Zoom. And how wonderful a decent gathering here on such a beautiful Melbourne day. It's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Jim Angus, AO. And why wouldn't you, when it's the Angus Mitchell Oration? He'll be following the footsteps of many high-profile presenters to our club. Incidentally, Jim did speak to the club some 12 years ago, I believe, and how the years have gone past. You will have read Jim's comprehensive and remarkable bio in the club bulletin. We congratulate him on the honour of being sworn in as Lieutenant Governor of Victoria on the 12th of November 2021. Jim was Dean of the Faculty of Medicine, Dentistry and Health Sciences at the University of Melbourne from 2003 to 2013. It was an enormous faculty, I think probably similar in size to what La Trobe University is today, in terms of budget and so on. I don't know of anyone who served on more critical medical, health and not-for-profit boards and councils than Jim. And recently he finished his presidency of the Stroke Foundation, where he did a wonderful job with that foundation. Jim was appointed by the Australian Government as Chair of the Australian Advisory Council on the Medical Use of Cannabis, is eminently suited to address us today on the medicinal use of cannabis in Australia, evidence or promise. Now, Jim and I are fellow golfers at Kicks and Heath. We're both struggling a bit with our form as the years go by. And I understand that Phil Mickelson, the allegedly outstanding US professional golfer, uses CBD oil and gums on a regular basis. And I'd be interested to know if Jim feels that the product could assist us to relax around the golf course. If time permits, Jim will be pleased to answer a few questions for the completion of his oration. Would you please warmly welcome Jim to deliver our 50-second Angus Mitchell Oration.
Well, what an introduction. It's so delightful for me and a great honour to be with you today. This is very special. You're a very special group of people. And there are many of my dear friends in this room. I'm surprised you're all Melbourne Rotarians. I'm delighted to be with you today on this very special occasion. So I'm deeply honoured to have been invited to give the 52nd Angus Mitchell Oration. He was, by all accounts, a visionary And the list of previous orators says much about the esteem in which Melbourne Rotary is held through the outcomes you achieve here in Melbourne and globally. I just wanted to share with you two personal connections with Rotary. First, my grandfather on my mother's side, Alexander Wilkie, was president of Edinburgh Rotary in 1918 and second vice president of Rotary International in 1922. Second, my daughter Kirsten was selected by Rotary, Melbourne Rotary, for the National Youth Summer Science Forum and then represented Australia at the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in Stockholm in 1993. So again, thank you for your vital work, Imogen. Now, please note in giving this oration, I have a disclaimer. I'm doing so with this oration in professional capacity, not on behalf of the Medicinal Cannabis Council, nor the Department of Health of Canberra, the TGA, or the Office of Drug Control. But the medicinal use of cannabis products, or medical marijuana, is at present the most vexed subject for patients and carers. Governments, law enforcement agencies, doctors, pharmacists, hospital administrators, speculative investors, and cultivators. You might say a perfect storm. Today I hope to share with you the rapid progress that is being made in Victoria and Australia to resolve the place of this ancient plant in modern medicine. Cannabis sativa was cultivated by Stone Age hunters for its tough fibres and making hemp rope, but around the campfire as early as 3000 BC, pipe cups have been found indicating early smoking of cannabis. The Chinese were early adopters of the medicinal properties for gout, constipation, rheumatism, and absent-mindedness. In India, surviving texts confirm the psychoactive properties where doctors use cannabis for insomnia, pain, and childbirth. Cannabis in medicine declined by the end of the 19th century due to the difficulties in dosage of a plant extract and the rise in popularity of synthetic opium-derived drugs. When these water-soluble opiates could be injected for an immediate high, there was no desire for slower onset smoke cannabis. In the USA, the marijuana tax of 1937 taxed prescriptions. By 1942, cannabis was removed from the USA into the medicines list and officially banned from use in 1970. But other forces were at play. Cannabis was starting to be used for cancer pain and AIDS patients with wasting syndrome to stimulate their appetite. By 1996, California, in defiance of US federal law, legalised medicinal cannabis, and in 2001, Canada adopted the system for regulating medicinal cannabis. The United Nations took a different stand through the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs in 1975. Cannabis, along with opium products and cocaine from the cocoa plant, were considered to be outlawed across the globe, essentially, unless a country established a single agency to control the cultivation, manufacture, distribution, import, export, and trading as a medicine, but not for illegal personal recreation. Such a protocol must also prevent diversion to illicit markets. Today, globally, cannabis is the most commonly used psychoactive substance. In 2013, the estimate was that 182 million people aged up to 64 in middle to high income countries use cannabis for non-medical purposes. This use has led to a marked increase in the healthcare cost to treat the condition of chronic cannabis use disorder and cannabis withdrawal syndrome, where patients have some of the list of symptoms including irritability, aggressiveness, anxiety, depression, loss of appetite, pain, shivering, sweats, elevated temperature, or even chills that can last up to a month following abstinence from their cannabis. The cannabis sativa plant has over 750 chemicals, including 104 cannabinoids, with the two major components being delta-9-tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, you'll all be familiar with THC, which is responsible for the psychoactive stimulation or the high. And also cannabidiol, CBD, that Peter mentioned, which does not have psychoactive actions. but the plant genetics can be manipulated. So the THC content in street cannabis has risen from 3% in the female plant to 16% over the last 10 years. But THC content and the other components vary from crop to crop, making the street product unreliable for dosage as a medicine. And of course, they contain, and probably does, every time contains contaminants, including pesticides, heavy metals and toxins. In Australia, Joseph Banks brought the cannabis plant to Sydney for growing hemp, with the intent to supply the British Navy with rope. But as with opium, cannabis was being heavily smoked. Commonwealth law prohibited cannabis importation and its use. In 1926, we signed the Geneva Convention on opium and other drugs. In the 60s, social drug culture and recreational use saw illicit cannabis, LSD and heroin again being used, state penalties toughened in response. Today it is estimated that 750,000 Australians use street-supplied cannabis every week for recreational or medicinal purposes, we can't determine which, and 35% of our population over 14 years have used in their lifetime. The question is, why are many people turning to medicinal use of cannabis and to the streets for supply? For some, it will be in desperation because of the ineffectiveness or side effects of ethical pharmaceutical drug therapies, or a hope to improve their quality of life. In December 2014, the Andrews government was elected. Following a pre-election promise, the Victorian government referred to the Victorian Law Reform Commission for a review and report on options to change the Victorian Drugs, Poisons and Controlled Substances Act to allow people to be treated with medicinal cannabis in exceptional circumstances. This excellent review was led by Dr. Ian Freckles, QC, as appointed commissioner, that made 42 recommendations to the Premier. As a result, the Victorian Parliament introduced a bill to regulate cannabis cultivation, manufacture and supply of near pure CBD, not THC, CBD, cannabidiol in February 2016 for one condition, only as an add-on treatment for childhood intractable epilepsy. Just CBD, just for one condition. The CBD was not mixed with THC, but had to be cultivated and purified from cannabis plants. The original intention was for a self-contained Victorian scheme that would be exempted from much of the existing Commonwealth drug regulation framework. But Commonwealth overarching legislation followed 2 weeks later, which exerted exclusive control over the domestic cultivation and manufacture in Australia. The Commonwealth instituted a policy to regulate cannabis within the existing drugs regulation framework, treating it the same way as any other unapproved, unregistered medicine. There was a debate in Parliament they might take a separate line and put cannabis out to the side. But the Parliament sensibly said for Australia, we're going to treat it as a medicine. Currently, the Commonwealth changed its policy norms for importation and began to allow imports of high-quality cannabis products under the control of the TGA and the Office of Drug Control. In October 2016, to coincide with the commencement of the Commonwealth legislation and regulation, cannabis products were mostly down-scheduled in Schedule 9, prohibited substances, to Schedule 8 for THC, controlled substances, and Schedule 4 for CBD with a prescription. These combined changes to law and policy allowed for the legal prescription of imported medicinal cannabis products pending the development of locally manufactured products today. So how does legal cannabis prescribing work? Because medicinal cannabis products are unregistered in Australia and fall under the UN Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs, they must be controlled by a single agency. That is the Australian Department of Health with the TGA and Office of Drug Control. So to prescribe cannabis products, a medical practitioner needs to complete a special access scheme form. It's an electronic form on the portal and must indicate the cannabis product to be prescribed, the dosage, the route of administration, the patient's diagnosis, and indication of use and request approval from the TGA before the product is obtained as an import or from secure supplies now in Australia. So it's a lot of rigmarole. So that's one prescription from your doctor, has to be assessed by the TGA and then approved. A lot of work. Clinical trials and authorised prescriber pathways are also in place for large studies. The special access scheme is working well now with short timelines. As of December, there were 11,000 new SAB subscriptions per month. There are 450 authorised prescribers. The number of patients being treated through these two schemes are over 170,000 nationally since January 17. There are 224 different medicinal cannabis products, can you believe that? And 44 suppliers that have been approved by the ODC to fill prescriptions in Australia, but at the patient's expense. There are many patients and carers that we have heard through focus groups who protest that the bureaucracy is too complex, too slow in allowing them access to quality medicinal cannabis products. But in contrast, there are numerous doctors, medical specialists, together with professional colleges, who are very reluctant to prescribe cannabis products because of their lack of experience and training, lack of evidence of efficacy, and concerns about safety, side effects, and harm. Community pharmacists are a key conduit between the doctor and the patient, as we all know, but they feel unprepared, uncomfortable, and not confident in answering questions about medicinal cannabis therapies. What about the pharmacology? So you can take a breath for a moment, it gets too complex. But the stinking flowering tops of the female cannabis plant are abundant with a host of cannabinoids. The main players, as I said, have been THC, the psychoactive properties, and cannabidiol CBD without. Since the 1960s, it has been known that humans have an endocannabinoid system. In our own brains, we've got receptors, CB1 and CB2 receptors. And we've got neuromodulatory lipids that talk to those receptors in our brains, that affect our appetite, pain sensation, mood, and memory. Many have been stimulated today, no doubt, by that lovely lunch. They activate these two receptors, CB1 and CB2. THC, psychotropic activity, stimulates CB1 receptors. But CBD, cannabidiol, is an antagonist of these both receptors. So there's an immense difficulty, therefore, to assign precise receptor activation or inhibition with these two cannabinoids when taken in a cannabis extract, let alone when other actions are at play with the many minor molecules in the plant. These other actions have been termed the entourage effect. Often the THC to CBD ratio could be 1 to 1, or 1 to 20, or unspecified as in the street products. The minor products of the plant contain terpenes, including limonene, pinene, humulene, and flavonoids, often called essential oils. On their own, they are claimed to be anti-inflammatory, analgesic, bronchodilated, sleep aids, and anxiolytic. But here is the research dilemma. As the science unpicks the actions of individual compounds, how does this knowledge relate to the overall effects when used in a combination of varying compounds and amounts? It is for that reason moving to known THC, CBD quantities is a critical first step, but unless the minor components are also quality controlled for content and quantity, the use of whole plant oils will remain problematic for research-led evidence of efficacy. So what's the evidence? In October 2016, the TGA commissioned a review of the evidence on medicinal use of cannabis and cannabinoids for 5 key medical conditions: epilepsy, palliative care, pain, nausea and vomiting, and multiple sclerosis. They surveyed multiple data sets, protocols, and randomized clinical trials conducted since 1980. Early results suggest that there is evidence for therapeutic benefit for add-on CBD, cannabidiol, that reduces the frequency of seizures in epilepsy. For palliative care, there is only a low level of evidence for benefit from a product called cannabinol, which is THC plus CBD. Similarly, for cancer and HIV/AIDS sufferers, the evidence is low for effectiveness. compared with the appetite stimulant, ergosterol. In patients suffering chronic pain, THC plus CBD treatment did associate with a significant reduction of 30–50% in pain intensity. Other clinical trials are now in the pipeline. In parallel, the TGA has conducted focus groups with medical specialists, consumer groups, in each of the 5 clinical conditions to discuss the evidence, to develop input for a set of guidance documents. These guidance documents, rather than guidelines, are published on the ODC website for you all to see. Medical practitioners are encouraged to use the prescribing guidance, collect data of use, long-term experience, especially adverse effects and efficacy. Did it work? And did they give a repeat prescription? Clinical trials conducted in whole or in part of Australia always add significant experience for our clinicians. But who will fund the clinical trials? And will they be add-on to existing therapy or standalone? In the very difficult condition of childhood epilepsy, Dravet syndrome, recently published in the New England Journal of Medicine, there was significant reduction in epileptic seizures with CBD oil drops. Taken orally, it's pure CBD, with up to 4 regular anti-epileptic drugs. So they're already on their therapy, you add the CBD. So there was some change to their lifestyle, where their comorbidities is a huge benefit to the patient, of course, the parents. But there were significant numbers of patients who withdrew due to significant side effects. So again, clinical evidence is critical to good medicine and critical for registration as a medicine in Australia. And what about cultivation? As of March 2021, 96 licenses to cultivate and produce cannabis for medicinal or research purposes have been granted in Australia. 96. Permits are then issued when the licence holder can line up a manufacturer. They've got to secure a site, infrastructure is in place. And 57 manufacturing licenses have been granted throughout Australia. The stock market is crowded with new companies. And it's estimated that at the end of 2022, there will be a sales revenue of $423 million at the end of this year. There is no doubt that Australia's oversight of the quality control and reputation through the TGA will see Australian exports in high demand. But one needs to reflect on the cost of establishing the production of cannabis products with a mix of THC, CBD, or the more expensive near pure CBD, cannabis. In my view, in Australia, it is very unlikely that medicinal cannabis will slide into a legally regulated recreational market, as has occurred in some US states and Canada. Australia, I understand, does not wish to jeopardise its valuable opium poppy cultivation industry for morphine that it produces under the Single Convention of the UN. So we will behave as a proper signatory to that Single Convention so that we can have a very valuable export product in opioids and in medicinal cannabis. So I see a tightening government-controlled cultivation, manufacture and supply for both onshore and export markets in medicinal products that in time will add value for our economy and employment and innovation. I should also note that the surge in the growing of hemp, which must contain less than 0.3% THC in Australia. There is a strong market for hemp seed oil as a source of vitamins and fatty acids in fruit products, and as a skin lotion for eczema and other skin conditions. And I passed by a market yesterday and they were selling honey, but you could also buy it with CBD infused honey. Out of the island, the cost. The supply of 98% pure CBD for epilepsy and potentially other conditions without psychoactive effects is around $40,000 per patient per year. But in May last year, the government approved CBD for this childhood rare epilepsy, Dravet syndrome, provided CBD was prescribed by a specialist neurologist and was added to at least 2 other anti-epileptic treatments. So for this specific condition, CBD was added to the Australian Registry of Therapeutic Goods and was agreed to be subsidised by the PBS. The cost for these 100 or so children's parents is now only $9 per month. This PBS listing has set a precedent. Manufacturers are eagerly waiting clinical trial results that might allow other medicinal cannabis products to be registered and possibly subsidised by the PBS. So how can an Australian startup company compete for price and quality of its products versus the illegal street homegrown products of dubious quality and content? This is a critical question in my view. Much has been invested by the Victorian government, over 35 million, in developing the genetics, cultivation expertise and associated extraction processes to produce a CBD-rich oil product. But how will this translate into a niche industry for Australia and exports? This is no doubt a growth industry, but that is totally dependent on prescribing doctors and their assessment of the safety, efficacy and risks, short and long term, for their patient of unregistered cannabis products. Our quality surveillance, evidence-driven registration system for medicines is priceless in protecting the Australian community. We are all on notice here. The explosion in the use of cannabis for medicinal purposes worldwide as a standalone or add-on therapy must be properly evaluated. If there is sufficient evidence that medicinal cannabis is safe and effective in the condition, then it may be registered and attract government subsidy if the cost-benefit is compelling. We are playing catch-up in the evidence and controlled clinical trial setting because of the previous illegal status of cannabis, while the community are agitated for access to quality safe products that they believe will give benefit. In December 2020, the TGA allowed low-dose pure CBD to be down-scheduled from S4 to S3, no prescription, pharmacy over-the-counter. To be available only to adults, only as oral, sublingual preparation, a max of 150 milligrams a day, which I believe won't do very much, and 1 month's supply as a complementary medicine for sleep and anxiety. However, to be registered, this product must meet efficacy, safety and quality standards set by the TGA. To date, no such applications have been successful. So that's where these companies are on notice to do the clinical trials to show that low-dose cannabidiol is effective. What about driving? If patients were prescribed medicinal cannabis containing THC, would they be able to drive? It's known that THC can be detected in blood or saliva for days after consumption due to its slow release from fat stores in the body, well after the more acute first phase psychoactive component has impaired your driving. In Victoria, legislation was passed in 2004 to allow police to conduct random roadside drug detection for THC and methamphetamine. And in 2006, MDMA or ecstasy was added, so those three are in your saliva test. Just to put the extent of drugs and driving into context, in 2015-16, 10,000 Victorian drivers tested positive to one or more of these drugs with the roadside saliva test. In Europe, 500 driver deaths occur each week, and psychoactive drugs are found in 15%. While alcohol may increase the risk-taking behaviour and speed, THC would decrease these risks. However, both alcohol and THC impair straight driving, so that the risk of a head-on smash is greatly increased when these drugs are compliant. You may have read recently about Fiona Patton's call in the Victorian Parliament. She argued that it's unfair for doctors to prescribe cannabis for patients who are unable to drive after taking the medication. This only applies to THC-containing cannabis products. The level of impairment is uncertain, unlike what is known about alcohol. The government has a working group looking at this issue. So the take-home message for us today is to seek your doctor's advice before driving with any prescribed medication. So in conclusion, Australia has in place a system that allows a supply and prescription for medicinal use of quality cannabis products of known composition of THC and CBD. The Commonwealth has allowed for quality imported products as our own cultivation, manufacture and formulation processes get underway. The Victorian government scheme has led the way for the cultivation of cannabidiol in its products for children with intractable epilepsy. The TGA has provided guidance documents on the medicinal use of cannabis and cannabinoids in 5 medical conditions. This will guide what product, at what dose, and for what condition might be prescribed. The process is highly unusual as quality evidence has been slow to gather owing to the illegal nature of this previously Schedule 9 drug for the past 50 years. Whether medicinal cannabis products will ever be first-line therapy standalone is uncertain in my view. The challenge for politicians, the medical profession and researchers is to identify when the medical benefit to risk ratio is sufficient to allow cannabis products to be registered medicines in Australia. It will take some time to sort this out, I'm sure, but the process here in Victoria and at the Commonwealth level has been extraordinary over the last 2 years, catalysed, I suggest, by a determined Premier and a superb Victorian Law Reform Commission report. For many patients, the most commonly listed barriers to access include finding a prescribing doctor, the cost, as is the lack of a government subsidy, lack of knowledge and interaction with other medications. Community pressure is still very strong for a relaxation of the laws surrounding the recreational use of cannabis, but this should not influence the roadmap for the appropriate use of cannabis and extracted products as medicines in Australia. So in conclusion, I am reminded that medicine is an art and a science. Much wisdom and science is required to separate the evidence from the promise and therefore find the right place for products from cannabis sativa in modern therapy. Thank you very much indeed.
Please stay here just for a moment. We don't have time for questions for the oration, but you didn't answer whether the infused honey was on my dog's.
We won't do you any harm.
Okay, I mean,
And there's always the placebo effect.
beautiful. Thank you. Well, Jim, please stay with us and the President come up in a moment. Thank you for such a professional and articulate presentation. It was just fantastic. On a subject that I think might be a bit foreign to some of the oldies in the room, but certainly we've got a great awareness these days. And what you've presented to us today in this oration is just outstanding. So thank you very much, and we're going to wish you all the very best in your role as Lieutenant Governor as well. And we just got a couple of little gifts that Andrew will give to you. Mic down, sorry about the sound system today. So we've got this certificate of appreciation today for you, which I don't know whether our cameraman or someone with the camera here today is there. Where are you, Joe? Oh, here's Ian. There's also here the 100 Moments with Rotary book, which I'm sure you'll find based on your family history as well, and also very special Rotary Centenary 100 socks, which will go well on the golf course. And those socks are limited edition and manufactured by our own past president Phil Edisby in Preston. So I'm sure you'll enjoy those. So, members and guests, would you once more show your appreciation and read. It's not another 12 years before you come back to the start. Over to you, Rich. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Peter, thank you. Well, breathtaking in a way to understand the complexity and dare I say, the guy wrote tension that stress around the decisions here. But thank you so much for the incredibly informative presentation, Jim. In closing today's meeting, the first thing I wanted to do was to correct an omission from my welcoming. One guest I neglected to mention is John Hancock from the Rotary Club of Bangkok. Where are you, John? Don't see him. Maybe
I'm online. I'm online.
Okay. Welcome, John. Joe, could you spotlight John? And they partnered with us with donations to significant projects. So, John, thank you for joining us online. Much appreciated. But thank you to all visitors and guests. It's been well attended today. And the particular thanks to our MC, Carol Bond, to our Thanksgiver, Peter Hollingworth, and our chairman today, who did a fantastic job, Peter Dakin. Thank you. And last but not least, our lunch setup team, which is a little behind the scenes activity that includes setting up the audio visual and is highly valued. Thank you all involved. And as they are a little short-handed today, anyone who's willing to hang around and help pack things up, would be greatly appreciated. A reminder that next week's guest speaker is Adam Jacoby, the founder of and chairman of iVote and director Global Strategic and Innovation at Swinburne University of Technology. Adam will be speaking on sharpening the ethical focus to digital media. Let me tell you, he's got a ripper of a presentation to talk to us about, which implies significant future roles for organisations like Rotary. The meeting will be right here at number 35, and bookings in advance are essential for catering purposes. We hope you can all join us, a few more as well. I just wanted to say thank you. We've got 58 people here today, and that's a nice increase from last week, and another 15 or 16 online, which makes this a well-attended event. Thank you all for being here, and onwards and upwards as the confidence in the post-COVID environment improves. So would you all now join me? We have another volunteer, David Crabb, to play the national anthem for us, please.